Okay, next quote. Normal psychic life depends upon the good functioning of brain synapses. If you don't know what synapses are, don't panic at this point. There are ways brain cells connect with each other. Okay, normal psychic life depends on the good functioning of brain synapses, and mental disorders appear as a result of synaptic derangements. Synaptic adjustments will then modify the corresponding ideas and force them into different channels. Using this approach, we obtain cures and improvements, but no failures. Synaptic adjustments. What do you suppose those little old synaptic adjustments are that this guy is referring to? Any guesses? Somebody shout it out. Electroshock therapy. Electroshock therapy, you know, a little synaptic. You wish it were as gentle as electroshock therapy. This is even more dramatic synaptic adjustments. Any other guesses? Yeah, frontal lobotomies. You know, you want to adjust somebody's synapses, so you just like slice off the front third of their brain or so. This was Agos Moniz, a Portuguese neurologist who invented frontal lobotomies. It had a different name at the time, but was the person who started this, and something that was done to tens and hundreds of thousands of people who had absolutely nothing wrong with them. One of the darkest chapters of where psychiatry gets in bed with ideology, massive criminal destruction of people's brains. This is what he had to say about the procedure on his acceptance of his Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for having invented it. So here we have somebody pathologically living in a world of understand how synapses are working, adjust them, and with that we obtain cures and improvements, but no failures. Final quote, worst one of all. The selection for social utility must be accomplished by some social institution if mankind is not to be ruined by domestication-induced degeneracy. The racial idea as the basis of our state has already accomplished much in this respect. We may and we must rely on the healthy instincts of the best of our people for the extermination of elements of the population loaded with dregs. Anybody want to guess who that was? Hitler. Nah, Hitler, that behavioral biologist, he was a little bit busy at the time. This was instead one of Hitler's main scientific propagandists. This was somebody living pathologically in a box that doesn't even exist, having notion of race and ethnicity and genetics and all of that, saying, let me fix that one, let me exterminate the elements of the population loaded with dregs, and I'll fix up that little problem of fixing something that ain't broken. And who was this? This was a scientist named Konrad Lorenz. Konrad Lorenz, who probably a lot of us are familiar with. Konrad Lorenz was one of the founding fathers of ethology. We'll learn all about that. But he, like everybody knows him, winding up in all the little kid nature books. Konrad Lorenz discovered imprinting in birds, and he'd be going around. He was this little Austrian guy with this cherubic white beard, and he'd always have these little Austrian shorts and suspenders, and there would be a whole bunch of duckies following him because they thought he was mom, and he was totally charming and irresistible, and this sort of old imprinting with his ducky kids. And he also happened to be a rabid Nazi propagandist who went to his grave saying that there was nothing wrong with what he did. These are not crappy fourth-rate scientists. These are not people working at, you know, the University of the Desert of Podunk or whatever. These are among the most influential scientists of the last century. These are people who influenced how people were educated, and when we decided it wasn't worth the effort of doing it, these are people whose influence led to the brains being destroyed of hundreds of thousands of people who had nothing wrong with them. These are the people who led to the notion that you fix up a problem that doesn't exist by exterminating 9 million people. These are not minor scientists. These are the most influential people of the last century coming out of science in many ways, living pathologically inside their own buckets and how they could explain the entire world. And thus, again, our goal is going to be to not fall for that, to think about human behaviors, and in some cases, to think about some of the most disturbed, some of the most frightening, damaged human behaviors, and resist the temptation to think inside a bucket and find the explanation. Again, every level we're going to talk about genes, hormones, neurons, environmental influence, whatever it is, that point will simply be the easiest way of describing all of the influences that came before. They're not even temporary buckets, there's no buckets. That will be our goal. Now, thinking about this and approaching human behavior, the biology of human social behavior, often the biology of abnormal human social behavior, we're going to have three intellectual challenges. The first one is recognizing circumstances where there is nothing fancy about us whatsoever. We are just like every other animal out there. And where the challenge is to accept that. Let me give you an example. You are a hamster. You are a female hamster. And you're sitting in your cage, and as a female hamster, what you do is you ovulate every 5 days or so, and you're going about your business and everything's great. Now, somebody puts another female hamster in the cage with you. And over the subsequent month or so, what happens is both of you will begin to lengthen your cycles and eventually synchronize them so that you are both ovulating the same afternoon on a regular basis. Amazing. This actually works this way. And menstrual ovulatory synchrony, people understand how this works in hamsters. It is done with olfaction, with pheromones, with chemical airborne signals from one female to another. And you can prove this by electrically recording from olfactory systems, or if you don't have much funding, you could take like a paper clip over the female hamster's nose, and she doesn't synchronize then. It's all done with olfaction. And what's most amazing is you put the two females together, and there's a way of disrupting it. Put a male hamster in there, and suddenly the cycles desynchronize and shorten, and you break it up with male pheromones. And what's even more remarkable is you put the two females together, and it's not random who synchronizes the other one. The dominant female synchronizes the subordinate one. Totally understood. People have been working on this for years, and it works this way in like goats and sheep and dogs and cats and pigs. Apparently, you could go to a 7-Eleven somewhere in Iowa and you could buy a can of pig ovulatory synchronization spray and take it home and just run wild. I have no idea why you would want to do that, but nonetheless, that's how you, like, it's up there with the cans of Cheese Whiz or whatever, and it's that well understood. And what's remarkable is it works exactly the same way in us humans, where it is known as the Wellesley effect. The fact that over the course of freshman year, this was first shown in Wellesley, 1970, over the course of freshman year, women, freshman year roommates tended to lengthen and synchronize their cycles, and it was done with olfaction. Women who had olfactory deficits didn't synchronize with their roommates. They would synchronize unless they were having close, intimate relationships with a male, in which case they desynchronized. And what's most cool of all is it's not random who synchronizes to who. The studies tend to show is the individual who is more socially outgoing, extroverted, dominating is the one who synchronizes the other one. And this is well enough understood that when I was in college, people would sit around at the dinner table and say stuff like, oh, when we roomed together this summer, I had her synchronized by August 1st. You know, this is what happens if you hang out with biologists, but we're exactly the same. The challenge there is recognizing there's nothing fancy about us. At various points in the class, we will look at comparisons between the human and the chimp genome, and it's virtually the same. Some of the time, we are just a plain old off-the-rack animal. The second challenge is going to be circumstances where we appear to be just like everybody else, all the other organisms out there, but we do something very different with the similarity. Let me give you an example here. You have two humans, two individuals who are going through a ritual. They are sitting at a table. They're absolutely silent, they're making no eye contact, and they do nothing more physically taxing than every now and then one of them picks up their hand and moves a little piece of wood on the table. And if these happen to be the right two individuals in the middle of a chess grandmaster tournament, these people are maintaining blood pressure for 6 hours running that you only see in a marathon runner. These people are going through thousands of calories a day doing nothing more than thinking. And this is outrageous, because you look at one of these chess grandmasters who's just taken down an opponent and took their queen or whatever, and they will have the exact same physiology as some male baboon on the savannah who's just ripped the stomach open of his worst rival. And we're doing it there just with thought. And some of the time, what's remarkable about us is we have absolutely typical, boring physiology, but we use it in ways that no other animal could. We get stressed by the inevitability of our mortality. We get stressed by reading something awful that has happened to a child on the other side of the planet. We get stressed by somebody zooming past us in some sports car, and we decide that we are now economically inadequate. And you never even see the person's face. You just see the car. We get stressed reading about something awful happening to a character in a novel. This is a whole realm of things that we could do that nobody else does. And on the flip side, we can feel compassion and empathy for a loved one, but we can also do the same for someone on the other side of a planet in a refugee camp. We can feel compassion for a member of another species. We feel badly when our pets are injured. This is another realm where the physiology of the response, the empathy, the emotional bonding, all of that, it's the same boring physiology as every other animal out there, and we are using it in a way that is unrecognizable. Now, some of the time, the challenge is the third category, which is when we are doing something that no other animal out there has anything remotely similar to. Let me give you an example here, a shocking example. You have a couple. They live together. They come back at the end of the day from work. They talk, they eat dinner, they talk some more, they go to bed, they have sex, they talk some more, they fall asleep. The next day, they do the same exact thing. They come home from work, they talk, they eat, they talk, they go to bed, they have sex, they talk some more. They do this every single night for 30 days running. Hippos would be repulsed by this, because hardly anybody out there in the animal kingdom has non-reproductive sex, let alone day after day, and nobody else out there talks about it afterward. And what we've got here is a whole novel domain of human behavior, language use, aspects of our sexuality, this profoundly damaging human uniqueness of some individuals confusing aspects of sexuality with aggression. In some cases, we are going to be out there on our own trying to understand what's up. Okay, so that will be the general strategy for the course. We will resist categorical thinking over and over and over, not just because that's cool and nuanced and subtle, all of that, but fall into categorical thinking and you can do unspeakable damage in a realm of science that makes a difference. We will do so thinking constantly about ourselves as a boring species just like all the others out there, as a species that has the same boring physiology but uses it in ways that are unrecognizable, as a species that does some things that are simply without precedent out there, and constantly struggling with what does biology have to do with it. Okay, general structure of the course. The first half of the course is going to be an overview, an introduction to the various buckets, the various categories. And what we're going to go through is understanding sort of an introduction to evolutionary theory, an introduction to what molecular genetics has to do with behavior, behavioral genetics, ethology, the brain, endocrinology, each of these buckets, and you know what happens next, which is in the second half of the course, we will look at specific behaviors and in each case rip apart the buckets. And in each case do the strategy of what does the behavior look like? What happened a second before, the world of neurons, what happened with the sensory stimuli that trigger those neurons, etc., all the way back to the evolutionary selective pressures. So the first half of the course is going to be the introduction to the bucket. And I will tell you right off the bat, it is a total pain in the rear. Because what we're going to be doing is, like every 2.5 lectures, just when you are getting the vocabulary down, we're going to jump to a completely different bucket. It is going to be dizzying and unpleasant and all of that. And then second half of the course, oh, the rewards finally come, of then putting all the pieces together, looking at individual categories of behavior. Sexual behavior, aggressive behavior, parental behavior, schizophrenia, depression, personality disorders, language use. In each of these cases, what's going on a second before, what's going on 10 million years before, where do all these buckets disappear in the interactions? So that's going to be the strategy for the course. Something critical about how the course was designed is it's got no prerequisites, because I really think this is a subject that everybody on Earth should be forced to learn about at gunpoint, and thus, it's a good thing, I think, to have this not be one of those upper-level bio classes. Let me just get a sense of who's here. How many of you are bio types, bio majors? Hum bio, psychology, anthro. Are there any English lit grad students in here? Yeah, okay. Good for you. Thank you for coming here. See what you think in 3 months, but nonetheless, the class has been designed explicitly to have no background whatsoever. How are we going to do that? We're going to do the usual song and dance of weekly sections and reviews and all that sort of thing. But in addition, during this first half of the course, when we're jumping from category to category, we're going to have each week additional sections, a catch-up section, which is for people who have no background in that area, getting you through the basics and getting you up to speed so that you will be able to then know what's up during the lectures. So those will be posted. The first one of these is, let me make sure I've got this. Yes, it will be this Thursday at 7:30 in the room next door. And this is going to be the introduction to evolutionary theory and getting you ready for what will be the evolution lectures Wednesday and Friday of this week. If you don't have a strong background, go to these catch-up sections. The TAs who will be giving it are really expert in those areas, lots of background, and this will be your chance to catch up. Look through the handout. I think I have a bunch of terms there or something where if you're not terribly familiar with those terms in some discipline, that's a sign that you should probably go for some of the catch-up stuff. If you really are just doing this, sort of being very adventurous with no background, if you can take it pass-fail, that will take off a lot of the pressure as well, because you could then actually pay attention to stuff here. And the whole point here is to be able to do this even if you don't have a science background, because the obvious argument I would make is everybody has to learn behavioral biology because we're being behavioral biologists every time we serve on a jury. Every time we vote whether or not money should be spent on solving some problem, whether it's a problem and whether it's solvable or not. Every time we try to make sense of a family member sunk in depression, are they having a biochemical disorder or are they just indulging themselves? We are behavioral biologists all the time, so it's probably a good thing that we be informed ones. So the catch-up sections there, take advantage of them. What else? We will have weekly sections, the usual type. People are not assigned to sections. There's going to be, 18 of them or so a week at various times. Go to whichever works for you. There will be a midterm in the middle, the midterm coming as we finish the last of those categories, last of those buckets. There will be a final. There's no paper or anything like that. So that will be the pattern. What else? Other stuff here. Office hours, my office hours are up on the handout. Other things, breaks. We will, with any luck, be able to, I with any luck will be able to be organized enough so that during each stretch of class, there will be a 5-minute break in the middle so you can stand up and just get to the front of the line for the bathroom, and then we will resume promptly before you get in there. So just to let you clear your heads a bit. Assignments, books, reading. There are 2 books that I have assigned for the course. One is by me, and you don't even have to read it. Just go buy a bunch of copies and bring me the receipt, and you got a great grade in there. Okay, so that one's going to be pertinent to the second half of the course. We're going to give you a list of the chapters that make the most sense to read. The other book is a book by an author named James Gleick called Chaos. Chaos, year after year after year in this class, provokes the strongest opinions. A quarter of the people decide it is the most irritating, irrelevant thing that could possibly have been assigned in the class and hate it. About half the people never quite figure out what's up with it. And a quarter of the people, their life is transformed. They no longer have to meditate. They no longer have to have they are at peace. At peace, I tell you. Because what this book does is introduce this whole radically different way of thinking about biology, taking apart a world of reductionism. For 500 years, we all have been using a very simple model for thinking about living systems, which is if you want to understand something that's complicated, you break it apart into its little pieces. And once you understand the little pieces and put it back together, you will understand the complex thing.